about a couple of the positive things that I've heard that we've heard. John Rothstein tweeted out last week that Kendall Weaver is going to have a bigger role on this year's team. Like I roll my eyes at that a little bit because it was kind of like, yeah, I mean, obviously he looked pretty good last year and he's only going to get better. So, like, yeah, of course he's going to have a bigger role this year. But that was nice seeing Kendall Weaver get some national attention before the season. This team, I mean, the staff, they love Julian Larry. Julian Larry is going to play a lot. I think that the addition of him reminds me a little bit of Serge Bari Rice, not necessarily in their play styles, but in the way that they're going to impact winning as a fifth-year veteran who's just played a lot of smart basketball games and makes good decisions with the ball in his hand, is a good on-ball and off-ball defender, even though he's a little bit undersized. So I've heard great things about Julian Larry. I expect him to have a huge role this year. Another guy who is going to have a bigger role than people expect this year, Devon Pryor, has had a great fall. He's had a great series, 2 weeks now of practices. He is going to play. I mean, that is a project that Ronnie Terry and the staff are very pleased with where it's at heading into year two on the Texas roster for him. So he was a reclass guy, 3-star recruit. They flipped him from LSU. No one really expected anything out of him last year. We didn't get anything out of him last year. We're going to get something at least out of Devon Pryor. I think that he is going to be one of the unsung heroes on this Texas team. If not a guy who plays a pretty big role, is one of the bigger players. And now I'll get into the non-conference slate. So yeah, it's ugly. The opener against Ohio State's gonna be fun.
That's gonna be
Zach,
real fun.
I'll bump it to you here in a second to talk about some of the games that you have your eye on. But I'll talk about what I like. The opener against Ohio State on opening night is awesome. Like it's great that Texas is playing in a highlight game on opening night, on a good opening night too. I'm excited about that. The Legends Classic isn't as bad as like maybe I thought initially. Like they're gonna play Syracuse. That's like Red Autry's gonna at least try and get them to the tournament this year. So that's a potential Q2 game, probably Q2 game. And then St. Joe's or Texas Tech. St. Joe's is the best team in the A10 in my opinion, and Texas Tech. I thought they did great things in the portal. They'll be one of the better teams in the Big 12. So yeah, then you got the UConn game. NC State's going to be garbage this year. Everything else is kind of but yeah, I mean they love those sub 330 net, like sub 330 ranked teams. Like they play like 7 of the 12 worst teams in the country last year in this non-conference schedule. So Zach, your thoughts on the non-conference
Well,
slate?
yeah, I mean, you both of you said it perfectly. And Tommy, when you said this is like kind of like a get right kind of schedule, it really is. There's a lot of questions with this team, and I feel like this schedule will help answer a lot of them. You have a lot of poor teams on there, obviously, but then you're flashing Ohio State, you're flashing Syracuse, and you get the Huskies at home. And we not to transition to another sport, but Texas women's basketball had their schedule released, and it's almost kind of the opposite, where you look at the schedule and it almost feels like teams don't want to play them. Now, for Texas, it seems like we don't want to play other teams a little bit, where we just kind of want to, or the Longhorns just want
Great
to
point.
figure stuff out and try to get, where does Trey Johnson fit in here? Where does Pope? Where does Larry fit in here? How does Kaluma work on this offense and defense? There's a lot of questions. And when you're look at the schedule, it allows these questions to be answered. I mean, you have all the way down, you have Houston Christian, you mentioned these teams. I mean, you have Arkansas Pine Bluff. These are historically bad basketball programs all around the area, all probably not costing a lot to come into the Moody Center, just allowing. And then I mean, I feel like this whole schedule, we're just trying to get the Longhorns are just trying to get right for A&M. That's that to me, that's what it feels like getting ready for A&M, getting ready for the season, because that's to me the first big game of the year is at College Station, and that's not until January 4th.
That
I
game's gonna be
I would
wild.
argue that is going to be a wild game. I would argue they're getting ready for UConn because that's their biggest
No,
non-conference game. I
100%.
mean, the only challenges they'll have before that will be the opener against Ohio State because it's your opening game. Things aren't going to go right regardless. I would be shocked if they're just firing on all cylinders in that game. Um, Maybe Syracuse and then maybe St. Joe's or Texas Tech, but they're playing, like Jason said, some very bad teams going into that UConn game. So at least they'll have a Power Four test in NC State 4 days before. But that's going to be the barometer, I think, for where this season goes for Texas. How do they look against the back-to-back national champs at home? They hung their hat on being so good in the Moody Center for the last couple of years. They struggled at home a bit more than they had in years past last year. There's your chance to show that you've got a solid home court advantage in your first year in the SEC. And then, yeah, absolutely. After that, that opening to the SEC slate is just brutal. They go at Texas A&M and then host Auburn and Tennessee. Whew, all in a week. That's all in a week. So, man, that's gonna be rough. But this you're gonna see this team's mettle tested very early on.
Yeah, I like what Zach said about how some of these throwaway games are gonna help them figure out who's gonna be playing where. I mean Trey Johnson, like he's gonna need a few games to get his legs under him. That's another guy, by the way, who is gonna have a huge role. I mean, I'm not really shattering the world by saying that, but I mean he's done exactly what they expected him to do since he came in. So he's gonna, as long as he adjusts to, game action and playing real teams, I mean, that's a guy who's going to be on the court in all the biggest moments. And so, yeah, the non-conference slate, like they open up against Ohio State and Vegas. I think Ohio State will be fun this year. I don't necessarily think they'll be good, but it is kind of interesting that they're facing a similar situation. Jake Diebler had the interim tag taken off and signed an extension, a lot like how Roddy Terry is. So I mean that aspect of it, both teams are built, primarily through the portal. So I think that aspect of it will be fun, but I don't think Ohio State's going to end up being a top four or five or maybe even six team in the Big Ten. And then, Houston Christian, Chicago State, Mississippi Valley State, they're going to win those three games by combined 100. And then, yeah, so I agree with Tommy that they're going to get right for UConn. And I think by then, we'll know who the five best players are. I think that though, like kind of the beauty of this team and having a deep roster, like they truly do have like 11 guys who they can play this year, which is exciting. Last year they had 9. And so to have 11 guys who they can probably rotate in and out, like these aren't all, not all players are created equal. So it's not like Cade Shedrick and Zarek Onyema are going to play the same amount, but like they have a lot of depth. And if guys aren't healthy, if guys aren't in good rhythms, they can kind of move guys around. Which will lead to my question: who is one guy that like you guys think needs to have a good first month of the season for this Texas basketball team? Like who if they have a bad month, are we going to be really worried?
Well, I feel like I'll say the obvious answer, and that's the freshman Trey Johnson. I'm more worried about how Trey Johnson's going to feel if he doesn't play well and how the team might change because of that. Because it feels like a lot of this team, it is built around Trey in a way that you see like a lot of other teams where they have one star and they're trying to build, we see it all around college basketball year in and year out. And it can hurt teams to really rely on one guy. So my like the biggest thing for Trey is how he is going to be able to blend in with the team. Is it going to be the Trey show, or is it going to be other people getting involved around the court? There's a lot of guards on this team. What's stopping them from playing 4 guards and making teams run with them? So, I think the biggest question is how is Trey going to play for me? How is Trey going to play? How is he going to fit in, and how is it going to affect the rest of the team?
Yeah, I somewhat agree with the fact that like Trey needs a good first month, but he is a freshman. Like if he doesn't have a good first month, like he's gonna peak in February, hopefully. Tommy?
Yeah, the sky won't be falling necessarily. I don't think if Trey Johnson has a bad month. I mean, maybe you get a little bit worried, but everything that we have heard about Trey Johnson is that this staff loves what he's done. He's living up to the expectations, and the kid's just a competitor. And he just gets buckets. That's all he does. He just scores the basketball. And if it takes him a while to do that, that's fine. Like Jason said, if he heats up in February, that's fine. And Texas puts themselves in a tournament position. That's the best time you can ask for him to kind of start to piece things together. But I think my answer would be Caden Shedrick. I mean, if he gets banged up or he's, not looking himself, not really getting involved, not rebounding the ball well, not giving Texas some sort of interior presence on the offensive and defensive side of the floor, you start to worry who's going to be physical for you down there, right? In that second round game against Tennessee, if Shedrick is boxing out, getting rebounds and playing better on the interior, Texas has a solid shot to win that game. The Longhorns just couldn't rebound to save their lives. And we've talked in, the last season about how Rodney Terry and Texas really in general don't build a very big team, right? This is a fast team. They want to be good in transition. They want to have good guards who can score the basketball. They don't necessarily lean on guys in the interior to score for you or, do much for you. But he's a guy who, since he's their only really experienced big body down there, I guess you could say, you know, I don't know if I would call Arthur Kaluma a big body, or I don't know if Zarek Onyema has progressed enough. It'll be interesting to see how they use him this year. But he's the tallest guy on your team. He has to have a good year for you on the inside. And more importantly, he has to stay healthy. The best ability is availability. And so far in his Texas career, he's hasn't been available in some crucial times and hasn't been 100%. So if he's 100%, if he's playing well through the first month and he's as good as he was at his peak defensively on the interior for Texas last season, you're going to be thinking a lot of good things about this team. But if it's the opposite, then you got to start to worry, are you going to throw a guy like, I'm trying to find him here. Are you going to throw Nick Cody in there? Are you going to throw Jamie Vincent in there? Vincent's your other guy who's 6'11", but he's a true freshman. He's, still trying to learn and develop. I think he's more of a developmental guy for this team, but because of their lack of size, Vincent might be a guy that you see thrown in there.
Vincent's a short 6'11", by the way. He's not actually 6'11", to my knowledge. I think he's more of a 6'9". But I've been, while you two were talking, I kind of conjured up three potential starting lineups that I think, like, I have no idea what they're going to run out on opening night against Ohio State, but there are three that kind of make sense to me. And I think the most realistic one is Julian Larry at the point, and then Tremont Mark and Trey Johnson at the wings, and then Arthur Kaluma at the 4 and Jason Kent at the 5. I think that that's probably the most realistic one. Another one would be Larry, Mark, Johnson, Kent, and Shedrick. That way, Kaluma's coming off the bench. I just can't really see that. I think Kaluma's going to be in the starting lineup. And then the last one was Larry, Mark, Weaver, Johnson, and Kaluma. That'll be kind of their small ball lineup. I don't think there's a whole lot of defense in that lineup. I know Julian Larry's a strong defender. Kendall Weaver's a good defender. We'll see what Trey Johnson does defensively. I have no idea. Arthur Kaluma is not a great defender. At least was not a great defender before coming to Texas. So we'll see if Rodney Terry's system can change that. But those are three starting lineups. Those are three starting lineups that I can potentially see Rodney Terry running out.
And I think that point, Jason, is why you kind of look at that non-conference schedule and maybe are a little bit grateful that it's not as loaded, because you got to figure out who the best 5 players on this team are. I mean, best 5 players and the best starting 5, I think, is two different things. You got to figure out who your starting 5 is. Like, do you want to do what Zach said? Have 4 guards out on the floor at one time and just try to run past everyone and, try to somehow sacrifice your interior presence and make up for it. I think that Caden Shedrick, if healthy, is a starter. I love Kendall Weaver coming off the bench. That's where he was so good last year. He would come in off the bench with fresh legs and just wreak havoc defensively and then go in transition and make plays. Sometimes they were, cartoonish plays where he would fly around and maybe get, thrown in the air or something and make some mistakes. But you take those growing pains with his development. Trey Johnson's got to be on the floor, I think. So and then I think Tremont Mark has got to be on the floor. So, your 3 guys who I think have to be on the floor in the starting lineup are Tremont Mark, Trey Johnson, and okay, so I guess maybe 2 guys. Who do you build around that? Those are your guys that Texas is going to have to build around, because those are your bucket getters, right? Trey Johnson's going to get his. Tremont Mark is going to get his. How do you build around that? I think that's the biggest question.
To me, it's almost a good problem that we have, that the Longhorns have so many guys. Like, it's something to complain about, but it's not the worst thing. And like as like we mentioned, the schedule kind of allows for these questions to be answered. And again, what happens in November is never a thing to say, like with what happens in February or down the road once SEC play. But this is a time for Texas to find their bucket getters. And also defensively, how do they work from there? Because we have a lot of offensively gifted people, but we don't, or the Longhorns don't know how they look defensively. So it just comes down to Rodney Terry, a guy who I'm really looking forward to seeing who fits in all of this is Devin Pryor. I mean, he reclassed last year and didn't play, but he was able to grow. You know who else did that was Quinn Ewers. So, I'm not calling him Quinn, but I think it really does go a long way to be able to sit on a bench at a high level program for a year and really learn about the system, about the coaching staff, about what they're trying to do. So prior, and now that Jason's mentioned that he had a great offseason, that the staff is really liking where he is, we might I think this only provides opportunity for people like Pryor to be able to come off the bench and prove something because there's so much to prove and there's so many games to do so.
Devon
And
Pryor, I haven't seen his game yet, but it's sort of just the way that he's being talked about, it's reminding me a little bit. I think that we might have a Kai Jones situation here where yeah, like we knew about him when he was a freshman, but he sat a lot and he's a physical specimen. Devon Pryor had their highest jump during their they did like a combine day essentially. They haven't done their like NBA draft like combine workout with like all the scouts there yet. I think that that's coming up at the end of the month. But they did a one of their first days of practice. They did like a conditioning thing and they posted all the results. And Devon Pryor had the highest jump like by quite a bit. And so he's an athletic specimen. I agree with Zach. He's gonna play. He's gonna play. He's gonna find his way on the court. Nick Cody, I think, is another guy. He's not healthy. He had knee issues his senior year of high school, and so that could be a red shirt. I don't like how they burned the red shirt for Pryor last year either, because I mean, they could have four freshmen now. He only played like 3 games last year, so but yeah, we'll see how Rodney Terry makes all those pieces fit. The one thing that this Texas team has, in addition to depth that they didn't have in years past, is that they have size, especially on the wings. Like they have big guards, Malik Presley, Tremont Mark. Um, Jamie Vincent is a big forward. Jordan Pope is the smallest guy who they're going to be running out this year, and like that's a bucket getter. That's another guy who I forgot. Like Jordan Pope's going to start. Jordan Pope's got to start this year. So they're this deep. We can't conjure up starting lineups. Our predictions show is going to be fun. Let me just say, our next show predictions where we predict the starting lineups and where they're going to finish in the SEC. And I think last year we did like surprise player of the year, and I was off on that. I forget who I had for that, but I was definitely off on mine.
Brock
And
Cunningham.
no, definitely not. Definitely not our favorite Finnish basketball player. So no. But no, I'm excited to see what they end up doing with the starting lineup. And just as the season gets closer, it'll be interesting to see, who emerges as the big dogs on this team because they have guys, a lot of guys who have been the top scorers, the top players, the top options on not good teams before. I hopped on the Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers podcast a couple of weeks ago with Sam Fetterman and Jonathan Lidskin. And I told them that the thing that really worries me about this team is that like they don't have players who are coming from winning situations. They might be winning players, but they're not coming from winning situations. So that's what worries me. And really that's kind of all I've got for today's show. They lost Ty Larson. It's unfortunate. But the like Tommy said, the biggest way of healing is winning, and we'll see if those winning ways start immediately in November. Any any other thoughts before we start to wrap this thing up from either of you?
Yeah, two parting thoughts for me. One, Devin Pryor is going to be the litmus test for how well Ronnie Terry's staff can develop. Coming in, they knew that he was going to be a developmental guy. I think he burned his red shirt because they didn't have the bodies. They didn't have the players last. Like he needed to play last year for Texas in some situations. So, you know, maybe it was that, or maybe it's this staff is just so high on what he can do. They don't think he's going to even be there that long. So I don't know how big of a role he's going to have this year, but that's your litmus test of how well can Ronnie Terry's staff develop players. So watch for Devon Pryor there this year. I think we talk about how big of a year this is for Ronnie Terry. I think this is a massive year for Steve McLean, who's kind of the defensive mind of this coaching staff, because they've got to get right on the defensive side of the ball. They were kind of hot and cold last year in terms of how they approached the defense, but Steve McLean's got to find a way to get this group to play some good defense going into the SEC, where it is hard-nosed basketball. They're going to have to play some really, really tough defenses and some really tough environments. So he's got to make his money's worth this year.
Yeah, just to touch on to that, the development and the defense is two big parts and questions we have for this long. It's the staff is so new. We don't really know what Ronnie Terry's like. We've only seen him for one full season. So with his second team, with guys who it's pretty much everyone he's recruited and guys he wants on his roster, just the questions are can go off a Google Doc. There's a lot of them. And I just, with the season starting in a month and, you're losing Larson, I think that shows a lot of what the culture might be like right now. If there's something going on that we're not aware of, it's that losing Larson, your director of recruiting, with 0 commits already in 2025, it almost feels a little desperate by Rodney to not even be worrying about Larson or anything like that. So it sucks to lose a guy like him. I'm sure he's going to kill it at Arizona State, but it just raises questions to what's next for the Longhorns.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And when does that first 25 commit happen? I forget the kid's name. They're in the final 3 for a top 40 kid who's committing
Kingston
it.
Flemings.
Oh, that's not who I was thinking of. There's someone else.
Oh, okay, my bad.
There's someone else. Kingston Flemings is at the absolute top of their list. And I don't know where they stand with that recruitment, but that's a
They're in a good,
massive.
as far as I know, they're in a good spot. And that's like, if there's a, I'll never say there's a must get guy in the age of the transfer portal, but if there's a guy you have to get in this class, it's Kingston Flemings. He's one of the best point guard. He is the best point guard in the country, and I think this year in
And
this
he's
class.
in your backyard. He's a San Antonio kid. Like
Yep.
they absolutely need to bring him home. Recruiting against Texas Tech. Woo! That's gonna be a big one. I know Nate Amen. I haven't heard his name said on a broadcast yet. Sorry. That's another big one. Who's gonna make his decision very soon. So like these dominoes are gonna start falling, and obviously like Ty Larson's a big loss. Like I was thinking like I want to kind of wrap up this. Like that's a big loss, but it's not the end all be all. Like Ty Larson, let's say this. There was probably a reason in Rodney Terry's mind why Ty Larson was not on the sideline in one of those coaching positions. And he left for that. So good for him. He's in a better spot for his career. He's going to kill it because he's killed it at every spot. But at the very least, yeah, it does feel like desperation, like Zach said, that Rodney Terry let him go like that. But he has the pieces in place for a reason. And
And don't forget that, sorry, Jason, I didn't mean to cut you off, but don't forget that Rodney Terry and Chris Ogden are very good recruiters still. So this is a staff that can still recruit. Same with Brandon Chappell. They still have some really good closers on the staff.
so by the next time we talk, we're going to do predictions for Texas and the SEC. We're going to do starting 5 predictions. We're going to do predictions for who we think is going to be hot off the roster and maybe who we don't think is going to be as hot. But it's all in good fun. We hope that everybody has a great year. But the reality of the situation is with 11 guys to make happy, it's just not going to happen. But it's great talking Texas basketball again. I mean, basketball is in the air with the press conferences starting back up again, and everyone's rolling out their preseason top 25s. Like we're in the thick of a fun football season, and Texas is #1 in football right now, which is great and a lot of fun to say. But basketball is near, and in less than a month, we are going to be doing a Hook'em Hoops podcast talking about an actual game that counts against